Hello and welcome to Dig School, cross-curricular inquiry-based learning themed around archaeology. This session is Magic Carpet, where we'll be exploring what artefacts for the afterlife can tell us about lived life. We're looking at key questions. What can we learn from the things that people have buried with them? How should these things be interpreted? And why does this matter? First thing we'll do is have a look at a term that archaeologists use a lot, grave goods. Grave goods is used to refer to items that are deliberately placed in a grave with a human being. So have a look at these three pictures on the screen and decide which of those you think are grave goods. So there's a belt buckle that was buried with a man found in a ship burial grave at Sutton Hoo in Suffolk. There's a collection of Anglo-Saxon gold found buried in a hole in Staffordshire. And on the right, there's a human skeleton from a medieval cemetery in Clare in Suffolk. I'll give you a couple of minutes to decide which of those, if any, or all, are grave goods. So, you decided? Well, the answer is the gold belt buckle from Sutton Hoo is a grave good. It's deliberately placed in the burial. The gold is from the same date, very much the same artistic style in many cases, but actually it wasn't deliberately placed in a burial with a human. It was hidden in a hole in the ground. And the skeleton on the right was deliberately buried, but we don't count the skeleton as part of the grave goods. It's not an object put in with the person, it's the person itself. Now, the first example we're going to be looking at is one of these four graves here. You can see they're lined up together. They're all very parallel. They're clearly respecting each other. They must have known that the graves were there when the others were put in because they're not cutting in and across each other. The one we're going to be looking at is the one on the left. This skeleton, when it was under excavation, immediately got archaeologists very excited. Once it had been cleaned up, this is what the grave looked like. So have a look at this and write down everything you can see here. And there's a close-up of the skull just on the right-hand side there. So write that down in your workbook. Okay, you've written down everything that you can see. So what I'm going to do is talk you through everything that actually was there in the grave, because many of the most significant objects either are difficult to make out or they're not even visible in that photograph. So the items are numbered in red on the diagram of the grave that you can see there, and in the top left-hand corner there are a pair of gold and garnet linked pins. Beautiful objects about 4 centimetres long, holding clothing together. And then very much in the same area around the sort of chest and throat of the skeleton was a gold and garnet cross. Another beautiful object about 4 centimetres across again, just at the neck of the skeleton. And in fact, when it was excavated, it even tipped down to go between the vertebrae as the grave had shifted over time. Another item was rather more everyday. It was an iron knife by her hip, probably worn in a sheath on a belt around her waist. There was then a decorated belt, it's called a chatelaine, which was a chain of copper rings with some beads with it. This is very common, very typical of female burials, and we're fairly sure this burial was a female, partly because of the objects with it and partly because we think from the skeleton it probably was, though actually it was very difficult to tell for certain. And then there were the objects that you probably did notice when you were writing down what you could see, were two sets of iron objects. There were these iron cleats that were actually part of the bolts fixing together a bed. And then there were a whole load of these little iron eyelets. Those would have been fixed into the side of the bed and then would have been used to suspend a mattress or a hammock within the bed to make it comfortable to lie in. The skeleton, we know from looking at it, she was about 14 to 18 years old, perhaps around 16. She'd been in poor health for quite a lot of her life, and the radiocarbon date dates her to between about AD 666 to 710. So that's the period about 50 years after Christianity is introduced to England, the period of the conversion to Christianity. So what do you think these things are for? Why are they in the grave? And what do you think they tell us about this person? Have a think and write down everything you can possibly think that might be an answer to that question. It doesn't matter if some of your ideas are wrong, it's just important to get your ideas down while you have them, and then you can think about whether they make sense or not. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. So you've now had a few moments to think about what this is telling us. And when we're thinking about what these things are for, they're to tell us something about this person. They are to make sure that the things that were important to her and who she was in life go with her, because it's quite a commitment to put expensive gold brooches and pins into the ground. Those are valuable items. They would have been prized items, but they've been put in the ground with her. They're also to give some comfort, perhaps. The bed is a comfortable thing to be buried in. And she would have had everyday objects like the knife with her as well. So they're to ensure that the dead person is comfortable, and that they have the things with them that say something about them. And what do these objects say about this person? Well, they tell us probably that she was female because they're female associated items. But they also tell us that she was wealthy. They're expensive items. This is an unusually rich burial for this period. Most burials don't have this sort of objects with them. And they also tell us that she was a Christian. That golden garnet cross is a Christian cross. So we can tell at a period of conversion, when some people were still following pagan religions and some people had converted to Christianity, that she was one of the people who was following the Christian religion. And we know that the conversion to Christianity sort of started at the top of the social hierarchy with the kings, and then sort of filtered down. The king's followers, the chief's followers would sort of follow the religion that their leader followed. So we can infer from this that this young woman was a high status female. She may have been a religious female, she may have been in a nunnery, a monastery, she may have been a member of a royal family. And it's definitely notable that bed burials and burials with golden garnet crosses or crosses like these tend to be associated with females, and often with young females. There seems to be a period, at this period of conversion, when status and importance sits with women. There's a shift after that, perhaps when it moves back to men, and before that the high status items again seem to be associated with men and be more militaristic, shields and swords. But there's this short period at the end of the 7th century when we see these high status female burials. And it's possible that the bed wasn't just the comfortable place to place her for eternity. It may have been associated with status again, and it has been suggested it may be associated with women's role for childbirth. It's a childbed. So this is the sort of thing this burial is telling us. But of course, this is a designed thing. People have decided what to put in here. And this is why burials are so interesting. Not only because the objects in them tend to be better preserved because they've been put in the ground and then, if you're lucky, left undisturbed, so they haven't got damaged by being in the open air where they've got rain and being moved around, damaging them and corroding them. So the objects are often better preserved. But of course, they're a message, in a way, from the past, telling us something about how the people who buried that person wanted them to be perceived, or how that person might have wanted to be perceived. Of course, they don't bury themselves, And perhaps it's an opportunity to show off, to show your status by committing that wealth to eternity rather than keeping it in circulation. There's a picture here of what this bed might have looked like with a headboard, and you can see the sort of suspension for the mattress. And there's a picture of a similar burial from elsewhere, again, a bed burial. So why include grave goods? These are valuable items. The person isn't really going to need them. Why put that stuff in there? Well, there may have been a need to show that person's identity, and the young woman we've just looked at, to show she was Christian, she was high status. Maybe that was important to the people who were burying her, that they wanted to have an elaborate funeral that had everything there. Or maybe it was felt that those things should go with her to the next life so that she could show her status in the afterworld. Maybe she was buried with the stuff needed for a journey to the next world. Maybe it was the stuff that she'd need in a life after death. Maybe it's just people have a feeling that people's stuff should be with them. If things were precious to them in life, they should have them afterwards. Maybe it's been suggested there's some need sometimes that people just want to dispose of the stuff used in funeral cemeteries, so pots that might have had drinks in that were part of the ceremony, perhaps are placed in the grave. We don't always know, but looking at these objects gives us some clues as to what people thought, what they believed. And they are a message. They're very different to the casual finds that we might find that have been lost and forgotten around a settlement site. They're a definite message. So what does get included then? So to think about this, we'll think about the idea that a grave, in a way, is where somebody goes, perhaps to spend the rest of eternity, perhaps to go on a journey, perhaps simply that they are going to another world and need to have stuff with them. So what we'll think about is, if you were travelling to another place that you weren't going to come back from on a magic carpet. It's not a huge magic carpet, it's maybe a metre wide, maybe a couple of metres long, enough space for you to sit on it with a bit of space to put some stuff around you. What would you take with you? What would you have with you for that journey that you didn't want to be without, or you wanted to be able to show people when you got there, or wanted to have for that journey? So these are some things that a former colleague of mine put on her carpet when we did this a few years ago. She reckoned she'd need a meal, might be a long journey, so there's a nice Peking duck there. She wanted a book to read. She wanted a hairbrush to keep herself looking tidy when she got there. An iPod, as it was then, that shows you how long ago it was, to listen to music. Cup of tea. Wouldn't want to go in another world without a cup of tea, would you? One of her favourite pieces of jewellery, and her mobile phone to keep in touch. And again, you can see that this is from a little while ago, and that's one of the ways that archaeologists date artefacts, is looking by the appearance of them. We can work out sometimes how old things are. So in your workbook, you've got a picture of a magic carpet. What I want you to do is draw on this all the things that you'd take with you if you were going on this journey to another place that you're not coming back from. Would you want to take things that you would need for the journey? Would you want to take things you simply couldn't manage without once you got there? Or do you want to take things that would tell people something about you, just to make sure that you could impress people or get people to treat you the way you want to be treated when you got there? Or do you simply want to have a load of stuff that people are going to be really impressed with when they wave you goodbye? So I'll give you as long as you like to fill in your magic carpet. Enjoy. Okay, so you've had a little bit of time to fill in your magic carpet. So now write down, what did you put on it? And have a think about what these things would say about you. What do you think people would think when they looked at that collection of stuff and knew nothing else about you? When we saw that belt buckle earlier from Sutton Hoo, the skeleton actually didn't survive at all. The sandy soil, it had dissolved away. So what I'd now like you to do is get into pairs and draw what you'd pack for another person, the other person in your pair. Don't talk to them about it. Just think about what you'd put on a carpet for them. So you've now had a chance to draw a carpet for yourself and a carpet for somebody else. Have a look at the carpet that was drawn for you by somebody else and compare it to the one that you drew for yourself. How similar are they, or how different are they? Think about what your parent or carer would have packed for you, or your teacher, or somebody else you know. What do you think that stuff might tell someone about you, or indeed about your society? Remember, they're looking at those objects in the same way that we were looking at those objects from that young woman's grave in the middle of the 7th century, in the Anglo-Saxon period. Have a think about what people might misinterpret of the evidence on your carpet, and think about why they might misinterpret it. Just because you've got a Chinese mobile phone, does that mean you were Chinese, for example? Just because you've got one sort of meal with you, does that mean that's all you ever ate? I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. So in part 2 of Magic Carpet, we're going to develop the skills and the thinking, the ways of thinking that you developed in part 1 when you're thinking about what objects do people have put in graves with them, and think about some real examples here. So the first one we're looking at is from a place called Varna in Bulgaria. It dates to about 4,500 years ago, so that's 4,500 BC, so that's about 6,500 years ago. This is the period when gold had first come into Europe, and this grave is the richest grave of the period in the whole region. In fact, it has as much gold in it as all the rest of the graves put together. This is a reconstruction of what it looked like when it was excavated, though we don't actually have any detailed illustrations of this. It's a little bit difficult to make out what's there, but I think you can see quite how much gold there is there. Slightly clearer example is this picture from a museum where you can see there's a skeleton laid out with all of the objects, or some of the objects anyway, that were in that grave. So have a look at those and have a think about what this is telling you about this person. Now, even being able to see the objects quite clearly, it's not always possible to know what they mean. So here we've got a labelled diagram. You can see that the skeleton is of a male, aged about 40 to 45, and they're sort of on the tallish side, 1.70 metre, 1.75 tall. Starting in the top left-hand corner, you can see the sort of things that there are with this skeleton. So there's a copper arrow, there are gold beads, there's a shell, bracelet or arm ring, there's decorations, gold decorations for a bow. So there's a bow and arrow, but you don't need gold decorations on a bow for it to work. There's an amber necklace, there are axes of stone and copper. Copper's not a terribly hard material, it's not desperately functional really as an axe, but it's very nice and shiny. There's a copper awl for piercing cloth, so you could sew different pieces of clothing or perhaps leather together. There are lots of small little, sort of look like gold dots, small little plates of gold appliques that are for decorating clothes. There's a copper chisel, there's a gold sheath, there are gold bracelets and arm rings, and gold necklaces, a gold and stone mace with a golden handle and a stone hammer. Not really very practical, could have been a ceremonial symbol of office. There's a couple of decorated ceramic vessels that may well have had something in them, and there are gold rings, some of them strung together around the head, and then 10 much larger gold appliques for decorating a garment or perhaps something around the head. So have a think about what all of these things may have been for. Why were they put in the grave? What do they tell us about this person? What do you think they tell us about the society that this person lived in? Remember, this is a deliberately collected assemblage of items that were put in to the grave, quite deliberately. I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. Okay, so what did you think? Well, when we look at what these things are for, I think we'd have to conclude they're very much about display and ostentation. It's a huge collection of gold by the standards of its time. And remember, this is gold that was then no longer could be used at all by that community. It's buried in the ground, lost and gone. So there must be some need to show off, to show the importance of that person, that much gold was put in there with them. But they're for a range of different things. Some of them are for decorating clothing, some of them are jewellery and adornments, some of them are symbols of status, and some of them are practical objects but unnecessarily decorated practical objects. The bow and arrow are much more ornate than they need to be. And the copper and stone axes, again, the copper axe isn't desperately functional. The pots may well have had food or drink in them, perhaps for the journey. They may have been part of a funerary ritual. They may have been both. They may have been part of a funerary ritual that's then put in the grave to sustain that person on their journey. But really, more than anything, it feels like this grave is about creating an ostentatious display so that people who were present at the ceremony when the grave was created and the person was in it perhaps could file past and admire and respect this person. So they tell us that this person was high status, was important. And it's even clearer that this was the case when this grave is compared with others from the same cemetery, because this is by far the wealthiest. So it tells us about the society this person lived in, that it's very hierarchical. It has one person at the top who is much, much richer, probably much, much more powerful than everybody else below. So it tells us we've got a very hierarchical society. And here's a picture of what this person perhaps might have looked like in life with those objects. We don't know what the fabric was like, and we don't know how much other stuff, other food remains, other exotic clothing has become lost. We don't even know if there was much in the way of timber, exotic timber cases or structures in the grave, because we don't have that detailed information. But it gives you some sort of idea. So the next example we're going to look at is from the UK, so it's right at the other end of Europe, as you can see from the map here. It's from 2300 BC, so it's about just over 4,000 years old. Just like the burial at Varna was the period of the first gold in Europe, this burial is from the period when gold first came into the UK, what's now the UK. And just like the Varna burial, the burial we're going to look at is the richest grave of its period. And when you search for Amesbury, Google Maps will give you a picture of Stonehenge, as you can see there. And that's significant because actually the grave we're looking at is exactly the same date at which those big stones were put up at Stonehenge. So the person we're going to be looking at may have come to visit Stonehenge. They may have even been involved in helping build it. And when I say they came to visit it, they came from quite a distance, as we'll see in a minute. So this is what this grave looked like when it was discovered. It was discovered just a few years ago, so we do have good records of what it looked like. This is a photograph of the grave when they'd come down just onto the top of everything that was there everything had got squashed very, very flat. There'd been a lot of heavy soil and stone on top of it, so everything's squashed very flat. And you can perhaps see the outlines of 5 pots, perhaps 2 of them at the top there. Look like these. You can perhaps see those. There's actually 3 more. Have a quick look and see if you can work out where those were. You managed to spot them? Well, they are a bit tricky, aren't they? So what we can do is have a look, like with the last burial. Here there's a picture of a museum display showing a skeleton exactly that same position with all the items, or most of the items, that this skeleton was found with. You can see there's those 2 pots that we saw a minute ago up in front of the person, just where they'd have been looking at. There's another pot just behind their head. You can see that brown smudge on the picture of the grave. There's one just behind their pelvis, and another one just by their feet. And perhaps now you know they're there, you can see those kind of brown smudges just sort of behind his legs and just by his feet. The drawing that you can see there shows everything that was found from the grave, and as you can see, there's a lot in there. Now, to save going through absolutely everything, there's a labelled diagram here again. So again, starting the top left-hand corner, you can see the 5 beakers, as these pots are called, are marked out, filled in orange, and you can see the skeleton on this diagram as well. So going around here from the top left, we've got a whole load of flint tools with a couple of those beakers. There's a copper knife. Again, remember, copper's not it's not a desperately hard metal, so a flint knife might have been more practical. There are 4 boar's tusks. These are used for metalworking. And just next to it, there's a striker light, which would enable someone to strike a light to make a fire. Then there are 2 small gold tags for wrapping around either tresses of hair or perhaps garments or laces holding a garment together. You can see pictures of those in the corner there. There's a wrist guard to protect somebody's wrists from the string of a bow when they're firing a bow. You don't want the string hitting your wrist. There's a shale ring, another copper knife, more flint arrowheads, lots of flint arrowheads in fact. More flint arrowheads going around the corner. There's a cushion stone used for metalworking. There's a whole load of spare flint flakes that somebody could have used to make some replacement arrowheads. And there's some more boar tusks to use in metalworking, another copper knife, a bone pin used to fasten clothing, and another one of those wrist guards, this actually up very close to the wrist of the skeleton in the grave. And that skeleton was of a male aged 35 to 45, and from analysis of the bones, we know that he wasn't born in the country he was buried in. He spent his childhood in the Switzerland area before coming to the UK. So when I said he came to Stonehenge, he definitely came there at some point from quite a distance. So like you did with the Varna burial, now have a think about what are all these things for? Why are they in the grave? What do they tell us about this person? And again, what do they tell us about the society he lived in? Have fun thinking about that. Write it down in your booklet. So you've had a chance to think about what these objects are for and what they can tell us. Well, they're put in the grave to be with the person. They're quite practical. There are many more practical items. There are all those pots. They may have been part of a funerary ritual. They may have had food or drink in them. Some analysis suggests they had milk in them or some kind of dairy product, but we don't know if that's something the person took with them, or whether it was something that was used in a funerary rite. There's a sort of practical use to them. Those boar's tusks, the striker light, that again has a feel of practical usefulness. It's about metalworking, about being able to make a fire, which is a useful thing to be able to do, whether you're metalworking or just want to cook or even just keep warm. There are all those arrowheads. There's plenty and spare. And those wrist guards are a practical item again there, that someone who was firing an arrow would need those to protect their arms from the bowstring. And there's even those spare flint flakes, so that if this person had run out of arrowheads, they'd be able to make some more using the boar tusk to shape those flakes of flint into arrowheads. And again, there's a couple of copper knives. There's everything he could possibly need and spares as well. And then there's those decorative gold tresses. What's interesting, of course, is those aren't anywhere close to the burial. You can see where they are in the grave. They're actually quite a long way from the burial. And although things do sometimes move around in a grave a little bit with burrowing animals and things over the centuries, they're very unlikely to have moved that far, and certainly not both of them. So that suggests those tresses may have been part of a garment that was placed there with the skeleton, or with the body, as it would have been when it went into the grave. So again, it's telling us this is a very hierarchical society. This skeleton has a bigger collection of artifacts with it than any other burial in the area. And it is the richest burial in the whole of the country at this time. So again, that tells us that there are a few people right at the top of the hierarchy who were buried with very different stuff to everybody else. And that the people who buried them wanted them and the people who were seeing the burial to know that they were important. But unlike the Varna burial, there's more a sense of somebody wanting to have stuff with them that they might need. It's particularly telling that there are spares of things. There are spare flints that could have been made into other items. There's a wrist guard and a spare wrist guard. There's a couple of copper knives. There are several boar tusks. There's a sort of complement of everything that this person might have been. He may have been a metal worker at a time when the technology for metalworking was very new. Only a few people would have known that. Maybe that's why he was so important. But there's also the material there simply for surviving everyday life. The bows and arrows could be used for hunting, but of course they could also be used in warfare as well. So maybe he was a warrior. So they do tell us that we've got a hierarchical society, but they hint perhaps that there were slightly different ideas, both about what was appropriate for someone to be buried with, the more practical items. Perhaps there's a stronger notion here of someone needing those practical items, perhaps on a journey, or perhaps to use their skills to be able to do something in the afterlife, rather than just sitting around being a lord or a king. So I don't know how much of that you got, and maybe you've had some other ideas, because we don't know all the answers to this. But you can see how they do tell us something, that things that people are buried with tell us something not only about that person, but also about what the society they were in was like, and what the people who buried them thought of them. Remember, it's a very carefully designed, constructed message, a decision about what to put in the ground with someone. And quite likely these graves were open for people to come and pay their last respects. They would have seen all these objects. Probably in all three of these cases, two men we've just looked at, and a young woman in part one as well. This is what our Amesbury Archer, as this burial has come to be known because of the arrows there, a reconstruction of what he might have looked like in life. And again, you can see again the slightly more feeling of action about this. When we're thinking about that notion of a journey, there's just one other body that was discovered with some stuff with it. This is Otzi the Iceman, he's known as. Now, he died alone of an arrow injury between about 3200, 3100 BC. So again, about 5,000 years ago, sort of between the two male burials we've just looked at. Again, he's about the age of 45. He died near the present Swiss-Italian border, but he wasn't deliberately buried. He died alone, but dying in the mountains where it's cold, His body was preserved for 5,000 years in the ice at the top of a glacier. Not until global warming started to melt that glacier was the body revealed, and you can see it in the photograph there. What's interesting for the context of thinking about what grave goods tell us is this person had stuff with him. Now, these aren't grave goods because they're not things that were deliberately put into a grave. He doesn't have a grave. He lay where he fell. But he does have stuff that he happened to have with him. So they give an indication of what someone would have had when they were on a journey, because this person was definitely on a journey. He was a long way from anywhere where there's a settlement. We don't know if he was making a regular journey or if he was trying to run away from someone. Certainly he was killed by an arrow which went into his shoulder and severed an artery, which meant he would have bled to death very quickly. But the things he was found with are interesting. So he's found with, as you can see from the list here, a dagger, 2 arrowheads, several flint tools, including an end scraper, borer, small flake, an antler retoucher, again for repairing or remaking some flint tools. 2 pieces of medicinal birch fungus with actually, in fact, anti-inflammatory and antibacterial compounds. Very useful to have when you're on a journey a long way from home. And he also had a hat made from brown bear fur. He had shoelaces of cow leather. He had leggings from goat hide and a coat made from a mixture of sheep and goat hides. A sophisticated collection of clothing along with shoes and a cape that was stuffed with grass to help keep him warm. The interesting thing is that this tells us the sort of thing that somebody did take on a journey. Now, he's quite a different date to our Amesbury Archer, but it is very striking how similar that collection of finds is to the sort of stuff that we found with the Amesbury Archer, minus, of course, the gold hair traces and the exotic items. So when we think about what we can learn about individuals and society from the things that they're being buried with, we can see from looking at these 3 particularly rich burials that we can surmise quite a lot. It helps if we know something. We wouldn't be able to interpret that cross that that young woman was buried with as a Christian item if we didn't know something about the Christian religion. And once we know that, then we can really try and reconstruct quite a lot about the sort of things she might have believed in. It's much easier to do that for her period than it is for the other 2, when we don't have any written information about the religion they practiced at all. But we can see for all 3 of these burials that they came from a hierarchical society where some people, a small number of people, are buried with huge wealth and huge care and huge extravagance, and other people were buried perhaps with just as much care, but not the same amount of extravagance. So we've got a hierarchical society. We can also see that we've got a society which was interested in display and was concerned about doing things the right way, and probably a society that wanted to show off that they had an association with someone who was rich and powerful. So we need to think, though, about why we need to be careful when interpreting this evidence. And there are 2 reasons, really. One is that a lot of it may have gone. You've seen how much the evidence for the wood for the bed, all the organic material, the cloth and the leather that may have made up exotic cloaks and clothing and perhaps even shelters that would have been put in graves with people. Such a lot of stuff has gone. But the other reason we need to be careful when interpreting this evidence is, remember, this is a designed set of information that is put there for someone to interpret. Someone is telling us a story. The people they're really telling the story to are the people who would have seen the grave, known the people in that community, and perhaps the people the dead person was going on to in the afterlife. Perhaps they're really telling that story for them. But of course, it's a story that we're reading. It doesn't necessarily relate precisely to how they were in real life. Something of an idealised story. And when you're thinking about that, think back to what you put on your magic carpet and how completely or incompletely it represented you, or how you might have chosen particular items to show yourself in a particular light. That's what we always need to think about when we're looking at artifacts from burials, because after all, it's not the person who's in the grave who decides who they're buried, it's the person who are creating that grave, the people who are still alive. They're the ones telling that story that we can only interpret through the artifacts we find. So I hope that's given you some idea of the sort of things we can learn from the items that we find buried in graves, which, as I said, are usually in much better condition and often quite special items. But you've learned a little bit about how they should be interpreted carefully, but nonetheless, they're a brilliant opportunity to try and get at something about what people believed. And it's particularly important because we don't have this stuff written down, certainly not for earlier periods, and even in a period like our young Anglo-Saxon woman, we don't know precisely what people really believed. We can just see how people were treated. And why does this matter? Well, of course, it helps us understand the past better. We can get some idea of how hierarchical societies were. Was it egalitarian? Everyone had the same access to everything, or was it very hierarchical? We've seen in examples we've looked at, they certainly were very hierarchical. So it tells us something about society. It tells us something about what people might have believed, about how they felt about people. And in all of this, it brings us a little bit closer to people whose stories we can only hear about through what's been left with them. Increases our interest and our empathy, perhaps, for people who lived lives very differently but left us amazing artifacts. So I hope you've enjoyed Magic Carpet, and I look forward to seeing you at another dig school in the future.